The blood poisoning had already turned her forearm the color of rotten meat when Theresa Kincaid stumbled through the swinging doors of the Dusty Rose Saloon in Roswell, New Mexico, clutching her arm and gasping for water. It was June of 1878, and the summer heat had turned the desert town into a furnace that baked everything under its merciless glare. The year had been hard on everyone, but Theresa had thought she could handle the journey from St. Louis to her uncle's ranch alone after her father died. She had been wrong about many things, but mostly about how dangerous a simple scratch from a rusty nail on a broken wagon wheel could become. Owen Winchester looked up from his whiskey glass at the bar, his sun-weathered face tightening as he watched the young woman sway on her feet. He was 26 years old, a drifter who had spent the last 8 years working cattle drives and breaking horses for anyone who would pay him honest wages. His dark hair fell past his collar, and his green eyes held the kind of wariness that came from seeing too much trouble in too many towns. But when Theresa collapsed onto the sawdust-covered floor, those eyes filled with something else entirely. He was at her side before the glass he had been holding even hit the bar. The bartender, a heavy-set man named Murphy, rushed around with a dipper of water, but Owen waved him off as he knelt beside the unconscious woman. Her skin was burning with fever, and when he carefully moved her hand away from her arm, he sucked in a sharp breath. The infection had spread from her wrist halfway to her elbow, red streaks radiating outward like lightning strikes frozen in flesh. The wound itself was small but festering, surrounded by swollen tissue that looked ready to burst. "Get Doc Stevens," Owen barked at Murphy, but the bartender shook his head grimly. "Doc left yesterday for Santa Fe. His sister took ill. Will not be back for at least 2 weeks, maybe more." Owen cursed under his breath and scooped Theresa into his arms. She was light, too light, and he could feel the heat radiating through her threadbare dress. Her dark blonde hair was matted with sweat and dust, and her face, which might have been pretty under better circumstances, was pale except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks. She could not have been more than 21 or 22, he guessed, far too young to be traveling alone through this harsh country. "Where are you taking her?" Murphy called as Owen headed for the door. "My room at the boarding house. Someone needs to tend to her, and I have got some experience with infections." That was an understatement. Owen had learned about healing herbs and poultices from an old trail cook named Santiago who had once studied with a curandera in Mexico. Santiago had saved Owen's life after a horse kicked him in the ribs 3 years back, and before the old man died of pneumonia last winter, he had passed on everything he knew. The boarding house was run by Mrs. Patricia Drummond, a stern-faced widow who normally would not allow unmarried men and women to share rooms under her roof. But when Owen kicked open the door with Theresa in his arms and Mrs. Drummond saw the state the girl was in, she simply pointed up the stairs. "3rd door on the right. I will bring clean water and linens. You better know what you are doing, Mr. Winchester, or that girl will be dead by morning." "I know," Owen said grimly, taking the stairs 2 at a time. He laid Theresa on his narrow bed and immediately began assessing what he would need. The infection was bad, worse than anything Santiago had shown him, but the principle was the same. He needed to draw out the poison, reduce the fever, and pray that it had not spread too far into her blood. His mind raced through everything Santiago had taught him about desert plants and their healing properties. Mrs. Drummond appeared with a basin of water and an armful of clean cloths. "What else do you need?" "I need honey if you have got it, raw and unpasteurized." "I need charcoal, the cleanest pieces from a hardwood fire. And I need you to send someone to find me prickly pear cactus pads, the young ones without too many spines and creosote bush leaves." Also sage if anyone has it growing. The landlady's eyebrows rose. You planning on cooking or healing? Healing. The honey fights infection, the charcoal will draw out the poison, and the plants will reduce inflammation and fight the fever. I learned it from a man who saved my life once. Mrs. Drummond studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I will get what I can. You keep that girl alive, you hear? She looks like she has been through enough already. After she left, Owen stripped off his vest and rolled up his sleeves. He soaked a cloth in the cool water and began gently cleaning Theresa's arm, wincing at how hot the infected skin felt beneath his fingers. She moaned but did not wake, lost somewhere in the fever dreams that held her. He noticed her hands were calloused, and her arms, though thin, showed the lean muscle of someone used to hard work. This was not some pampered city girl playing at adventure. She had been working, surviving, fighting to make her way in a world that chewed up and spat out people tougher than her. While he waited for the supplies, Owen used his knife to carefully cut away the fabric of her sleeve, giving him better access to the wound. The sight made his stomach turn. The original injury was clearly from something metal, probably rusty based on the way the infection had taken hold so viciously. The flesh around it had started to die, turning black at the edges. If he could not stop the spread, she would lose the arm. If it went much further, she would lose her life. Mrs. Drummond returned within 30 minutes, and Owen was impressed by how quickly she had gathered everything. A young Mexican boy named Carlos had apparently known exactly where to find the plants Owen needed, and he stood in the doorway now, his arms full of cactus pads and desert brush. My grandmother is a curandera, Carlos said shyly. She says to tell you that you should also use tobacco if you have it, mixed in with the poultice. Owen smiled despite the grim situation. Your grandmother is a wise woman. I do not have tobacco, but ask her if mesquite sap would work as a binder for the poultice. Carlos's face lit up. Yes. She uses that too. I will bring some. The boy disappeared, and Owen set to work. He used Mrs. Drummond's kitchen knife to carefully scrape the spines from the prickly pear pads, then split them open to reveal the mucilaginous interior. The substance inside was thick and cooling, perfect for drawing out heat and poison. He mashed the cactus flesh in a bowl, then added crushed creosote leaves, which released a sharp, medicinal smell. The charcoal he ground into a fine powder before mixing it in, turning the whole mixture black. When Carlos returned with a jar of mesquite sap, Owen stirred in a generous amount along with a spoonful of the honey Mrs. Drummond had provided. The poultice looked like something dredged from the bottom of a swamp, but Owen knew it would work. It had to work. This is going to hurt her, he said to Mrs. Drummond, who had stayed to help. The infection needs to be drained first, and that wound needs to be cleaned out properly. Can you hold her shoulders if she wakes? The older woman nodded, her face set. Do what needs doing. Owen heated his knife blade in the lamp flame until it glowed, then let it cool just enough to touch. He had learned from Santiago that a hot blade sealed as it cut, preventing fresh infection from setting in. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the knife to the worst of the swelling and made a quick, clean incision. Theresa's eyes flew open and she screamed, a sound of pure agony that tore through Owen's chest like a bullet. Her body arched off the bed, but Mrs. Drummond held her shoulders down with surprising strength. Owen worked as quickly as he could, draining the putrid fluid that had built up beneath the skin. The smell was nauseating, but he forced himself to focus. He cleaned the wound with whiskey, which made Theresa scream again before she mercifully passed back into unconsciousness. Then came the poultice. Owen packed the mixture directly into and around the wound, covering the entire infected area with a thick layer of the black paste. He wrapped it with clean cotton bandages, making sure the poultice was held firmly in place, but not so tight as to cut off circulation. Finally, he made a tea from the sage leaves, which he hoped to get into her once she woke enough to swallow. "Now we wait," he said, sitting back and wiping the sweat from his forehead. His hands were shaking with exhaustion and spent adrenaline. Mrs. Drummond looked at him with new respect. Where did a cowboy learn to do all that? From a man who was more than just a trail cook. Santiago Martinez. He died last winter, but he taught me that healing is just as important as any other skill a man can have out here. Well, Mr. Winchester, I hope his teachings were as good as you think they were. That girl has a long fight ahead of her. Owen nodded, pulling a chair up beside the bed. I am not leaving her side until she is through it. The first night was the worst. Theresa's fever climbed so high that Owen feared her brain would cook inside her skull. He changed the poultice every few hours, and each time the mixture came away darker and fouler smelling than before, which meant it was drawing out the poison. He sponged her face and neck with cool water, trying to bring down her temperature. She thrashed and muttered in her delirium, calling out for someone named Thomas, begging her father not to leave her, crying about money and debts, and a ranch she had to save. Owen listened to it all, piecing together the story of her life from the fragments that escaped her fever-burned mind. She had lost her father recently. She was trying to reach an uncle in New Mexico territory. She was alone and desperate and had been far braver than anyone should have to be. "You are going to make it," he whispered to her, even though she could not hear him. "I am not going to let you die, Theresa. I promise you that." He did not know when he had learned her name. Perhaps Mrs. Drummond had found papers in her saddlebags, which someone had retrieved from her collapsed horse outside the saloon. But somehow knowing what to call her made it more personal, made him more determined to save her. By dawn of the second day, the infection had stopped spreading. The red streaks that had climbed toward her shoulder had faded slightly, no longer the angry crimson of fresh poison but a duller pink that spoke of a body beginning to fight back. Owen changed the poultice again and managed to get a few spoonfuls of sage tea between her cracked lips. She swallowed reflexively, and he counted that as a victory. Mrs. Drummond brought him food, which he ate mechanically, never taking his eyes off Theresa for more than a moment. Other residents of the boarding house peeked in curiously, but the landlady shooed them away with sharp words about privacy and decency. Only Carlos was allowed to visit, bringing fresh cactus and plants as needed, his dark eyes wide with concern for the sick woman he had never met. "Will she live?" the boy asked on his third visit. "Yes," Owen said, and realized he truly believed it. The fever had started to break, and though Theresa was still unconscious, her breathing had grown steadier and deeper. On the third day, the infection had visibly retreated. The dead flesh at the edge of the wound had sloughed away, revealing new pink skin beneath. The swelling had gone down dramatically, and when Owen touched her forehead, it was merely warm rather than blazing. He allowed himself to hope. It was late afternoon when Theresa finally opened her eyes. Owen had been replacing the poultice, his movements gentle and practiced after 3 days of constant care. He felt her gaze on him and looked up to find a pair of startling blue eyes staring at him with confusion and exhaustion. "Easy," he said softly, setting aside the bowl of poultice and reaching for the cup of water he always kept nearby. "You have been very sick. Do not try to sit up yet." "Where?" Her voice was a raspy whisper, her throat raw from days of fever and screaming. "Roswell, the boarding house. You collapsed in the saloon 3 days ago." He slipped his hand behind her head, lifting it just enough so she could sip the water without choking. "Small sips. Your stomach will not thank you if you gulp it." She obeyed, her eyes never leaving his face. When she had drunk enough, he lowered her head back to the pillow and set the cup aside. "My arm," she whispered, moving her fingers experimentally. Relief flooded her face when they responded. "I thought I would lose it. You nearly did. You had blood poisoning from a wound that went bad." "When is the last time you cleaned and dressed it properly?" Shame flickered across her face. "I tried. I had some whiskey and a clean cloth, but it hurt so much and I thought it would heal on its own if I just kept moving. I had to get to my uncle's ranch. I could not afford to stop." "You almost paid for that decision with your life." Owen's voice was sharper than he intended, fear and relief making him harsh. He softened his tone. "What is your uncle's name? We should send word that you are here." "Martin Kincaid. He has a ranch about 30 miles northwest of here, near the Hondo River." She paused, then added, "I am Theresa Kincaid. Owen Winchester, and before you worry about imposing, you should know that Mrs. Drummond, who runs this boarding house, has already declared that you are to stay here until you are fully recovered. She has a soft spot for young women in trouble, though she would never admit it." A ghost of a smile touched Theresa's pale lips. "And you, why did you help me?" "Most men would have let me die in the saloon." Owen considered the question, looking at her face properly for the first time now that the fever flush had faded. She was indeed pretty, with delicate features that spoke of Eastern refinement. But there was steel in those blue eyes, a core of strength that had carried her across half a continent alone. Something stirred in his chest, something he had not felt in a long time. "I could not stand by and watch someone die when I had the knowledge to help," he said finally. "A good man taught me about healing, and I reckon it would dishonor his memory if I did not use what he taught me. Then, I owe you my life, Owen Winchester." "You owe me nothing except the promise that you will rest and let that arm heal properly. The infection is gone, but you are still weak. It will take time for your strength to return." Theresa's eyes grew heavy and she fought to keep them open. "My horse, my belongings, all safe." "Your horse is at the livery and your bags are here. Everything is taken care of. Now sleep. I will be here when you wake." She surrendered to exhaustion, her eyes closing even as she whispered, "Thank you." Owen sat back in his chair and released a long breath he had not realized he was holding. She was going to live. The knowledge filled him with a fierce joy that surprised him with its intensity. He had saved lives before, pulled men from rivers, and patched up knife wounds after bar fights. But this felt different. This felt like the universe had put Theresa Kincaid in his path, for a reason he did not yet understand, but was eager to discover. The days that followed fell into a comfortable rhythm. Each morning, Owen would wake from his makeshift bed on the floor and check Theresa's arm, carefully removing the old poultice and applying a fresh one. The wound was healing remarkably well, the angry red fading to pink and then to the healthy color of new skin. Theresa's appetite returned, and Mrs. Drummond took great pleasure in bringing up trays of hearty food that slowly put flesh back on the young woman's bones. Owen sent word to Martin Kincaid through a rider heading in that direction, and within a week, a grizzled rancher in his 50s burst through the door of the boarding house, his weathered face creased with worry. He swept Theresa into a careful embrace, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Girl, when I got the message that you had nearly died, I thought I had lost you like I lost your father. What were you thinking, traveling all this way alone?" "I was thinking that you wrote saying you needed help on the ranch, Uncle Martin, and that I had nothing left in St. Louis after Pa died." Theresa's voice was stronger now, though still tired. "The debts took everything. The house, the shop, all of it. Your letter came at exactly the right time." Martin Kincaid turned to Owen, his sharp eyes taking in the younger man's careful attention to his niece. You are the one who saved her life." "I did what anyone with the knowledge would do," Owen said, uncomfortable with the gratitude shining in the older man's eyes. "Do not sell yourself short, son. Mrs. Drummond told me what you did, how you sat with her for 3 days without sleeping, how you made medicines from desert plants that even Doc Stevens probably does not know about. You gave me back my family. There is no way I can repay that, but I will try. Do you have work?" Owen hesitated. He had been planning to drift south to El Paso, looking for ranch work or maybe a spot on a cattle drive. But the thought of leaving Roswell, of leaving Theresa, made something in his chest tighten uncomfortably. "Nothing lined up at the moment. Then come work for me. I pay fair wages, the bunkhouse is clean, and the food is decent. More importantly, you would be near enough to check on Theresa while she finishes recovering. The girl is stubborn as a mule and will probably try to do too much too soon unless someone with sense keeps an eye on her. Uncle Martin." Theresa protested, but her cheeks flushed with color that had nothing to do with fever. Owen found himself smiling. "I reckon I could do that. Thank you, Mr. Kincaid. I accept your offer. Call me Martin. Any man who saves my niece's life is not going to stand on formality with me." They moved Theresa to the ranch a week later, once she was strong enough to sit in a wagon without exhausting herself. Owen rode alongside, leading his own horse, a rangy bay gelding named Copper. The Kincaid Ranch turned out to be a sprawling operation with good grazing land fed by the Hondo River, several hundred head of cattle, and a ranch house that spoke of years of hard work and careful management. Martin was a widower with no children of his own, which explained why Theresa's arrival meant so much to him. He had lost his wife to cholera 5 years earlier, and the ranch had become his entire world. Having family here again brought life back to the place, a fact that the ranch hands noticed and appreciated. Theresa's presence, even in her weakened state, brightened the atmosphere immeasurably. Owen settled into the rhythm of ranch work easily. He had been breaking horses since he was 18, and Martin had several wild Mustangs captured from the desert that needed training. Owen's gentle approach, learned through years of trial and error, worked wonders with the skittish animals. Within days, he had the respect of the other ranch hands and Martin's unspoken approval. But it was the evenings that Owen looked forward to most. After supper, when the day's work was done, he would often find himself on the ranch house porch, where Theresa would sit in a rocking chair, her healing arm resting on a cushion. They would talk for hours, their conversations ranging from practical matters like ranch work and the challenges of frontier life to deeper subjects like dreams, fears, and the paths that had brought them to this place. Owen learned that Theresa's father had been a skilled carpenter in St. Louis, but drinking and gambling had slowly destroyed him after her mother died when Theresa was 12. She had tried to keep the business afloat, learning the trade herself and taking on as much work as she could, but her father's debts had been too great. When he finally died of liver failure, the creditors had descended like vultures, taking everything. Martin's letter offering her a home had been a lifeline she grabbed with both hands. "I know people thought I was crazy to travel alone," she told Owen one evening as the sun painted the desert sky in shades of orange and purple. "But what choice did I have? Stay in St. Louis and end up in a factory or worse? I would rather take my chances out here, even if it meant dying in the desert." "You almost did die," Owen reminded her gently, "but I did not. You saved me." She turned to look at him, her blue eyes serious in the fading light. "I have been meaning to ask you something, Owen. Why did you really help me? You could have walked away. Most people would have." Owen was quiet for a long moment, choosing his words carefully. When I was 18, I left home because my father wanted me to be a shopkeeper like him. We had a terrible fight and I said things I regret. I headed west looking for adventure and freedom, and I found plenty of both. But I also found loneliness and hardship and moments when I thought I might not survive. Santiago found me half dead from exposure during a blizzard in Colorado and nursed me back to health. He taught me that we are all connected, that saving one life creates ripples that spread outward in ways we cannot predict. When I saw you collapse, I saw myself at 18, desperate and alone and in need of help. I could not walk away from that. You are a better man than most, Owen Winchester. I am just a man who had a good teacher. He paused, then added, but I will admit, as I got to know you through your fever dreams and then through our conversations, I found reasons beyond obligation to be glad I helped you. Theresa's breath caught, and in the twilight, Owen could see her pulse beating quickly at her throat. What reasons? You are brave. You are strong. You have a quick mind and a kind heart, and you make me laugh. I have been drifting for 8 years, Theresa, never staying anywhere long because nothing ever felt like home. But sitting here with you on this porch, watching the sun set over the desert, this feels like home. She reached out with her good hand and took his, her fingers warm and steady. I feel it too. I thought maybe it was just gratitude, what I feel when I see you, but it is more than that. When you are near, I feel safe. When you are working out on the range, I find myself watching for you to return. When we talk, I forget about everything I have lost and think only about what I might have found. Owen lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. Your uncle might have something to say about a drifting cowboy courting his niece. My uncle adores you. He told me yesterday that you are the best horseman he has ever seen, and that he hopes you will stay on permanently. She smiled, a mischievous light in her eyes. Besides, I am 21 years old and have crossed half a continent alone. I think I can decide for myself who I want to spend time with. 21. That makes me feel old. I will be 27 come September. Ancient, she teased, practically in your grave. He laughed and squeezed her hand. Will you let me court you properly, Theresa Kincaid? I do not have much to offer right now except a horse, a saddle, and a talent for working with animals, but I am a hard worker and I will treat you with the respect you deserve. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, Owen, I will let you court me. I will let you do more than that if you prove yourself worthy. Is that a challenge? Consider it a promise. The summer passed in a haze of hard work and growing affection. Theresa's arm healed completely, leaving only a thin scar that she wore as a badge of survival. She threw herself into ranch work with the same determination she brought to everything, learning to cook for the ranch hands, managing the household accounts, and even learning to ride properly under Owen's patient instruction. Martin watched the growing relationship between his niece and his best hand with approval, never interfering but always present as a protective presence in the background. Owen felt himself falling deeper in love with each passing day. He loved the way Theresa laughed, throwing her head back with pure joy. He loved her competence, the way she tackled every challenge with fierce determination. He loved the quiet moments when they would sit together on the porch, not needing words to feel connected. And he loved the passion that sparked between them, the stolen kisses in the barn, the way her eyes darkened when he touched her hand, the electricity that crackled in the air whenever they were near each other. By autumn, when the cottonwoods along the river turned gold and the desert air finally cooled from its summer fury, Owen knew what he wanted. He spoke to Martin one evening, the two men sitting on the porch after Theresa had gone to bed. I want to marry her, Owen said without preamble. I know I have only been here a few months, but I love her, Martin. I want to build a life with her, right here on this ranch if you will have us." Martin took a long pull from his pipe and regarded Owen thoughtfully. "I figured this was coming. You two are not exactly subtle about your feelings. I will understand if you have objections. I am not a wealthy man, and my family back in Ohio would not be any help even if I was still in contact with them. But I am a hard worker, and I will spend every day of my life making sure Theresa is happy and safe. Owen, I have been watching you for months now. I have seen how you are with the horses, patient and kind even when they test you. I have seen how you treat the other hands with fairness and respect, and I have seen how you look at my niece like she hung the moon and stars. More importantly, I have seen how she looks at you. That girl loves you, son, and she deserves happiness after everything she has been through." Martin paused, then smiled. "You have my blessing. Ask her, but fair warning, she will probably say yes before you even finish the question." Owen laughed, relief flooding through him. "Thank you, Martin. This means everything to me." He asked her 2 days later on a Sunday afternoon when they rode out to a secluded spot along the river. The cottonwoods formed a golden canopy overhead, and the water burbled over smooth stones, creating music that filled the peaceful silence. Owen had been planning an elaborate speech, but when Theresa turned to him with sunlight in her hair and love in her eyes, all the pretty words fled his mind. "Marry me," he said simply, pulling a ring from his pocket. It was a simple gold band with a small turquoise stone, nothing fancy, but he had spent a month's wages on it. "I love you, Theresa. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to build a family with you and grow old watching sunsets from that porch. Marry me." Tears streamed down Theresa's face as she nodded, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, yes, Owen, I will marry you. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. You saved my life, and then you made me want to live it fully. Yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the passion and tenderness he had been holding back for months. She kissed him back just as fiercely, her arms wrapping around his neck, her body pressing against his. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Owen rested his forehead against hers. "I will make you happy," he promised. "You already do," she whispered back. They were married in November of 1878, in a small ceremony at the ranch. The local preacher came out from Roswell, and what seemed like the entire town turned up to celebrate. Mrs. Drummond brought an enormous cake and cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. Carlos and his grandmother came, bringing gifts of woven blankets and herbal remedies for good luck and fertility. The ranch hands cleaned up remarkably well in their Sunday best, and Martin stood as Owen's best man, his gruff exterior cracking to reveal the emotional man beneath. Theresa wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Drummond and 2 other women from town had helped her sew, and Owen thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. When they exchanged vows under the vast New Mexico sky, promising to love and honor each other through whatever trials life might bring, Owen felt a sense of rightness settle over him like a warm blanket. This was where he was meant to be. This was who he was meant to be with. The celebration lasted well into the night, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Owen danced with his wife until the stars wheeled overhead, holding her close and marveling at how completely his life had changed in just 6 months. He had come to Roswell as a drifter with no ties and no plans beyond the next job. Now he was a married man with a home, a family, and a future that stretched out before him full of promise. Martin had given them his blessing to build a small house on the ranch property, a place of their own while still being close enough to help run the operation. Over the winter, Owen worked on constructing a sturdy two-room cabin near a bend in the river, using lumber hauled from the mountains and stones gathered from the desert. The other ranch hands helped when they could, and by spring, the cabin was finished, complete with a stone fireplace, glass windows, and a porch that faced west to catch the sunsets. Theresa made the cabin into a home, sewing curtains and braiding rugs, and filling the shelves with books and small treasures. She planted a garden in the spring, coaxing vegetables from the stubborn desert soil through sheer force of will and careful irrigation. Owen built her a chicken coop, and soon they had fresh eggs every morning. Life settled into a peaceful rhythm of work and love and quiet contentment. On warm evenings, they would sit on their porch just as they had during their courtship, talking about their days and making plans for the future. They spoke of children they hoped to have, of expanding the ranch, of traveling someday to see the ocean or the great forests of the Pacific Northwest. But mostly, they were content to simply be together, two people who had found in each other the home they had both been searching for. The first summer of their marriage brought challenges. A drought threatened the water supply, forcing the ranch hands to drive the cattle farther afield in search of grass. Owen worked from dawn to dusk, his skin darkening under the relentless sun, his body growing lean and hard from the physical demands. Theresa worked just as hard, managing the household, tending her garden, and taking on more responsibility for the ranch accounts and correspondence. Martin's health had begun to decline slightly. Nothing serious, but enough that he appreciated having capable help. Through it all, Owen and Theresa's love deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, the unspoken communication that comes from true intimacy. Owen learned that Theresa was grumpy in the mornings, until she had coffee, that she hummed while she worked, that she cried at beautiful sunsets and laughed at terrible jokes. Theresa learned that Owen was quiet when troubled, that he had nightmares sometimes about his family back east, that his hands were gentlest when he was most emotional. They fought occasionally, sharp words born of exhaustion or stress, but they always made up before sleeping, neither willing to let anger fester. Owen had seen too many relationships destroyed by pride, and Theresa had learned from watching her parents that love required constant tending, like a garden that would wither without care. In the spring of 1880, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. She told Owen one evening as they sat on the porch, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. He stared at her for a moment, the information taking time to process, and then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to Roswell. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around until she laughingly begged him to stop before she got dizzy. "A baby," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "We are going to have a baby." "You are going to be a father," Theresa confirmed, tears of happiness streaming down her face. "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Owen admitted, "but also happier than I have ever been. Except for the day you married me. That is still the happiest day of my life." "Mine too," she whispered, kissing him softly. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite the heat of another New Mexico summer. Owen became almost comically protective, insisting that Theresa rest more and work less, much to her amused exasperation. Martin was delighted at the prospect of becoming a great uncle and began carving toys for the baby, his gnarled hands moving with surprising delicacy. Owen found himself thinking often about his own father during those months. He had left Ohio in anger, determined to prove he could make his own way in the world. He had succeeded, but the cost had been a decade of estrangement from his family. Now, about to become a father himself, he understood things he had not before. He understood fear for a child's future, the desire to protect and provide, the weight of responsibility that came with bringing a life into the world. One evening in late summer, he sat down and wrote a letter to his parents. It was the first communication he had initiated in 8 years, and the words came hard. He told them about Santiago and the lessons he had learned. He told them about Theresa, about saving her life and falling in love with her. He told them about the ranch and the baby coming and the man he had become. He apologized for the harsh words he had spoken and the years of silence. He told them that he understood now, in a way he could not have before, why his father had wanted a secure future for him. He did not expect forgiveness, but he hoped for understanding. He mailed the letter from Roswell and tried not to think about whether he would ever receive a response. Owen and Theresa's son was born in October of 1880, arriving with the first cool winds of autumn. The birth was long and difficult, and Owen paced outside the bedroom door for hours while Mrs. Drummond and Martin's housekeeper attended to Theresa. When he finally heard the baby's first cry, he nearly collapsed with relief. Mrs. Drummond emerged with a squalling bundle and placed it in his arms. "You have a son," she said with a tired smile, "and your wife is fine. Exhausted but fine. She wants to see you." Owen entered the bedroom on shaking legs and found Theresa propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat, and her face pale but radiant. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and showed her their son, this tiny, perfect human they had created together. "He is beautiful," Theresa whispered, touching the baby's soft cheek. "What should we name him?" Owen thought of Santiago, the man who had taught him so much and whose death had left a hole in his life. "Santiago, I would like to call him Santiago if that is all right with you." "We can call him Santi for short." Theresa smiled. "Santiago Winchester, I like it. Your teacher would be honored." Little Santi was a healthy, hungry baby who quickly became the center of their world. Owen discovered depths of love he had not known existed, a fierce protective instinct that made him understand why animals fought so hard to defend their young. He would spend hours holding his son, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the way Santi's eyes would try to focus on his face, the strength in that miniature grip. Theresa bloomed into motherhood, exhausted but fulfilled. She nursed Santi while humming the lullabies her own mother had sung to her, rocked him through fussy nights, and somehow still managed to keep the household running smoothly. Owen helped as much as he could, changing soiled cloths without complaint, walking the floor with a crying baby so Theresa could sleep, and falling more in love with his wife every day as he watched her navigate the challenges of being a mother. In December, 3 months after Santi's birth, a letter arrived from Ohio. Owen stared at his father's handwriting on the envelope for a long time before opening it with trembling hands. His mother had written most of it, her flowing script filling several pages, but his father had added a note at the end. They forgave him. More than that, they were proud of him. They wanted to meet Theresa and their grandson. They understood why he had left and respected the man he had become. His father's note was brief but heartfelt, admitting that he had been too controlling, too focused on security and not enough on happiness. He asked if they might start over, build a relationship based on who they were now rather than who they had been a decade ago. Owen showed the letter to Theresa that evening, and she read it with tears in her eyes. "You should invite them to visit," she said. "Or we could go there. Santi is too young to travel far now, but in a year or 2 we could make the trip. Your parents deserve to know their grandson." "And you," Owen said, pulling her close. "They deserve to know the amazing woman I married. The woman who survived blood poisoning and crossing the desert alone, who learned to run a ranch and garden in the desert, who gave me a son and made me believe in the future." "You give me too much credit," Theresa protested, but she was smiling. I give you exactly the credit you deserve. You are the strongest person I know, Theresa Winchester. You are my wife, my partner, and the love of my life. I look at you, and I still see that woman who stumbled into the saloon with infection climbing her arm, too stubborn to quit even when she should have been dead. I see that woman who said yes when I asked her to marry me, who built a life with me out here in the middle of nowhere. I see the mother of my child and the keeper of my heart. And I thank God every single day that you collapsed in Roswell instead of any other town, that I happened to be in that saloon, that Santiago taught me how to make a poultice that saved your life. Theresa was crying now, but they were happy tears. I thank God for the same things, especially the poultice. That poultice brought me you. They stood together on their porch as the sun set over the desert, their son sleeping peacefully inside, and looked toward the future with hope and confidence. Behind them was a story of near death and salvation, of a cowboy's knowledge saving a desperate woman's life, of poison drawn out and healing begun. Before them stretched decades of love and partnership, of children raised and grandchildren welcomed, of a ranch that would prosper under their combined efforts. The years that followed were full of the joys and sorrows that make up any life. Martin Kincaid died peacefully in his sleep in 1885, leaving the ranch to Theresa with the understanding that Owen would manage it. They grieved his loss but honored his memory by running the operation with integrity and skill. The ranch prospered under their leadership, growing from a modest cattle operation to one of the most successful in the territory. Santi grew into a bright, curious boy who loved the horses as much as his father did. In 1883, Theresa gave birth to twin daughters, Emma and Grace, who inherited their mother's blue eyes and their father's stubborn determination. The cabin by the river grew too small, so they expanded it, adding rooms and a proper kitchen, until it was a real house that echoed with the sounds of children and laughter. Owen never forgot what he owed to Santiago Martinez. He made it his mission to teach others about the healing properties of desert plants, passing on the knowledge that had saved Theresa's life. When the town of Roswell finally got a proper doctor in 1887, Owen worked with him to document traditional remedies, creating a reference that would help countless others. Carlos, the boy who had helped gather cactus, grew up to become a respected healer himself, apprenticing with his grandmother and later with Owen. In 1889, Owen and Theresa finally made the trip to Ohio with their 3 children. The reunion with Owen's parents was emotional and healing. Years of hurt and misunderstanding finally laid to rest. His father was 63 and gray, his mother 58, both of them aged by time but still strong. They fell in love with Theresa immediately and doted on their grandchildren, especially little Santi, who at 8 years old was full of questions and energy. During that visit, Owen's father took him aside one evening. "I was wrong," the older man said simply. "I tried to force you into a life that would have made you miserable. I am glad you had the courage to leave, even if it broke your mother's heart at the time. You have built something good out here, son. You have a family and a purpose, and that is all a man can ask for in this life." "I learned from a good teacher," Owen said, thinking of Santiago. "He showed me that there are many ways to be a man, many ways to contribute. Healing is just as important as building or farming or running a business. Maybe more important, because what is the point of everything else if we cannot preserve life?" Wise words. "Will you teach your son?" "I am teaching all my children. Theresa too. We never know when knowledge like that might save a life." They returned to New Mexico in the fall of 1889, and life continued its steady rhythm. The children grew, the ranch prospered, and Owen and Theresa's love remained as strong as it had been the day they married. They still sat on their porch most evenings, watching the sun paint the desert in glorious colors, talking about everything and nothing, content in the simple pleasure of each other's company. In 1895, when Theresa was 38 and Owen 43, they welcomed their fourth child, another son they named Martin after Theresa's uncle. By then, Santi was 15 and already taller than his father, a skilled horseman who had his own ideas about improving the ranch. The twins, 12 years old, were inseparable and showed signs of their mother's head for business. The Winchester family was a force in New Mexico territory, respected for their integrity, their skill, and their generosity. Owen sometimes thought about the chain of events that had brought them together. A rusty nail, an infection that spread for days, a poultice made from desert plants, a cowboy who happened to be in the right place with the right knowledge. Any one of those elements missing and Theresa would have died, and Owen would have drifted on to El Paso or somewhere else, never knowing what he had missed. But all the elements had aligned. The infection had spread up Theresa's arm for days, bringing her to the brink of death. Owen, the cowboy, had made the poultice that saved her life. And from that moment of crisis had bloomed a love story that would last a lifetime and beyond, into the lives of their children and grandchildren, and all the generations that would follow. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Owen and Theresa stood on the porch of their house and looked out over land they had worked and loved and built upon. Their children were healthy and happy. The ranch was thriving. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, economic downturns and personal losses, and emerged stronger for it all. You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had not collapsed in that saloon? Owen asked, his arm around Theresa's waist. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. I used to in the early days, but not anymore. This is the only life I want, the only one that makes sense. You saved me that day, Owen, but I saved you too in my own way. You told me once that you had been drifting, never finding home. I gave you a home. We gave each other everything that matters. I love you, he said simply. 20 years married, and I love you more now than I did the day we wed. I love you too, forever and always. They watched the sun set over the New Mexico desert. Two people who had found each other against all odds, whose love had been forged in the crucible of near death, and sealed with trust and commitment and shared dreams. The infection that had nearly killed Theresa had instead brought her to Owen, and the poultice he made had done more than save her life. It had given them both a future neither could have imagined, full of love and family and purpose. In the distance, they could hear their children's voices, young Martin laughing at something Santi had said, the twins arguing good-naturedly about whose turn it was to collect eggs. These sounds, these ordinary beautiful sounds of family and home, were the legacy of that desperate day in 1878 when a dying woman stumbled into a saloon, and a cowboy with knowledge and compassion chose to act. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of seasons in the desert. Santi married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring spread in 1903, and 2 years later, he made Owen and Theresa grandparents for the first time. Emma and Grace both married in their early 20s, choosing good men who understood the value of strong women. Young Martin showed an interest in medicine, and Owen encouraged him, even helping him apply to medical school in St. Louis, the same city his mother had fled decades earlier. Owen and Theresa aged gracefully together. His hair turned silver at the temples and then fully gray. Hers, still long, became streaked with white that she refused to hide. Their hands grew weathered and spotted with age, but they still fit together perfectly when they walked or sat side by side. The passion that had drawn them together mellowed into a deep, abiding contentment, the kind of love that needs no words because it is written in every gesture and glance. In 1910, Owen was 58 and Theresa 53. They had been married for 32 years, and their family had grown to include 7 grandchildren with another on the way. The ranch had expanded to include mineral rights and additional grazing land. The house by the river had been expanded again and again until it was a proper homestead, the heart of a small empire built on hard work and careful stewardship. One evening in late spring, as they sat on their familiar porch watching the sun set, Theresa reached over and touched the faint scar on her arm, barely visible now after more than 3 decades. "Do you remember the first time I sat on a porch with you?" she asked. "The boarding house in Roswell. You were still so weak you could barely lift a cup of water, but you were beautiful and you were alive, and I was already falling in love with you even though I did not fully realize it yet." "I knew," Theresa said with a smile. "I saw the way you looked at me, like I was precious, like I mattered. No one had looked at me that way since my mother died. It made me feel alive in a way that had nothing to do with your poultice. That poultice changed both our lives." "It did. Do you still teach people about it?" "Every chance I get. Martin uses variations of it at the hospital in St. Louis. He tells me it has saved dozens of lives over the years. Santiago would be proud." "You made him proud long ago, Owen. You honored his teachings by passing them on. That is the best legacy anyone can leave." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and stars began to emerge in the vast New Mexico heavens. Owen thought about the long, winding path that had brought him to this moment, the anger that drove him from Ohio, the years of drifting, meeting Santiago and learning about healing. That day in the Roswell saloon when he made a choice that changed everything. Every decision, every twist of fate had led to this porch, this woman, this life. "I would do it all again," he said suddenly. "Every hard moment, every mistake, every lonely night on the trail. I would do it all again exactly the same way if it meant ending up here with you." Theresa turned to him, her blue eyes bright with tears and love. "So would I. Even the infection, even nearly dying, all of it led to you, to us, to this beautiful life we built together. I would not change a single thing." Owen pulled her close and kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, feeling the steady beat of her heart against his chest. This was what mattered, not the ranch or the money or the respect they had earned in the territory. This moment, this woman, this love that had endured for over 3 decades and would endure until their last breaths and beyond. The years that followed brought both joy and sorrow, as all years do. Owen's mother died in 1912, his father following 6 months later. Theresa wept with Owen as they mourned from afar, unable to make the trip to Ohio in time for the funerals. But they took comfort in knowing that the reconciliation had happened, that those final years had been filled with letters and visits and love. Young Martin finished medical school and returned to New Mexico, setting up a practice in Roswell that quickly became known for its combination of modern medicine and traditional healing techniques. He married a teacher named Sarah, and they gave Owen and Theresa 3 more grandchildren to dote upon. Santi took over the day-to-day running of the ranch in 1915, when Owen was 63 and ready to step back from the hardest physical labor. Owen remained involved, teaching his sons and grandsons about horses and land management, but he was content to let the next generation take the lead. He and Theresa spent more time traveling, visiting their children and grandchildren, and even making one final trip to Ohio to see the places of Owen's childhood. They returned to their house by the river in the fall of 1916, and both of them knew without speaking that this would be their last journey. They were tired, ready to settle into the final chapter of their lives surrounded by the land and family they loved. In the summer of 1918, as the world tore itself apart in the Great War, Owen and Theresa celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch, and there was a feast and dancing and stories told late into the night. Owen, at 66, was slower than he had been but still strong. Theresa, at 61, had kept her beauty, though it was now the beauty of age and wisdom rather than youth. As the party wound down and the grandchildren fell asleep in various corners of the house, Owen and Theresa slipped away to their porch, reclaiming their sacred space for a quiet moment together. The sky was brilliant with stars, the Milky Way stretching overhead like a river of light. 40 years, Theresa said wonderingly. Sometimes it feels like 40 days and sometimes it feels like forever. It has been the best 40 years of my life, the only 40 years that mattered. We have been blessed, Owen. So many people never find what we found. So many marriages are about survival or convenience, but we had love, real, deep, lasting love. We still have it, Owen corrected. We will always have it. She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder, exactly as she had thousands of times before. They sat together in the darkness, two people who had faced death and chosen life, who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who had built a legacy that would outlast them both. Owen thought about that day in 1878, about the young woman stumbling into the saloon with infection spreading up her arm, about the poultice he had made from desert plants and old knowledge. He thought about the days and nights of fever, the moment when he knew she would live, the first time she opened her eyes and looked at him with recognition. He thought about falling in love, about the wedding, about the birth of their children, about every sunrise and sunset they had shared. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "For what? For surviving, for saying yes, for building this life with me, for every day of these 40 years. Thank you for saving me, for seeing me when I was at my worst and choosing to help anyway, for loving me, Owen. For giving me a life I never dreamed possible." They sat on their porch until the moon rose high and the night grew cool, two people who had found in each other everything they had been searching for and more than they had known to want. The infection that had spread up Theresa's arm for days had brought her to the brink of death, but the cowboy's poultice had saved her life. And in saving her life, Owen had found his own, had discovered purpose and love, and a future that stretched far beyond his wildest imaginings. The story could have ended there, with two elderly people content in their love and accomplishments, but life rarely provides such neat endings. Owen and Theresa lived on for many more years, watching the world change around them. New Mexico became a state in 1912, transforming from territory to equal partner in the Union. Automobiles began appearing on the dirt roads, though Owen never fully trusted them, preferring his horses to the end. The Winchester Ranch adapted and thrived, incorporating new techniques while honoring old wisdom. In 1925, Owen was 73 and Theresa 68. They had 15 grandchildren and had recently welcomed their first great-grandchild. The house by the river had become a gathering place for the entire extended family, a symbol of love and stability in a rapidly changing world. One evening in October, as the cottonwoods turned gold and the air held the first hint of winter's chill, Owen and Theresa made their way to the porch as they had done countless times before. Owen's steps were slower now, aided by a cane he pretended not to need, and Theresa moved carefully, her joints stiff with arthritis. But they made it to their chairs, to their place, and settled in to watch another sunset. You remember the first sunset we watched together? Theresa asked, her voice still clear and strong despite her age. Every detail. You were healing from the infection, sitting in that rocking chair at the boarding house. Your arm was wrapped in bandages, and you were so thin I was afraid a strong wind might blow you away. But your eyes were bright, and when you smiled at me, I felt something shift in my chest. I knew then that you were going to be important to me. I just did not know how important. I knew you would marry me someday, Theresa said with a hint of her old mischief. I decided it that evening, watching you talk about your dreams and fears. I decided you were the man I wanted to spend my life with. Bossy even then, Owen teased gently. Someone had to make the decision. You were too busy being noble and proper and asking my uncle's permission. She laughed, and the sound was like music, worn and beloved. They fell into companionable silence, holding hands as they watched the sun sink toward the horizon. The desert spread out before them, harsh and beautiful, the same landscape they had loved for nearly 50 years. In the distance, they could see the ranch buildings, the barns and corrals that housed horses descended from the ones Owen had trained decades ago. Smoke rose from chimneys, indicating that their family was gathered for dinner, waiting for them to return. But neither Owen nor Theresa was in any hurry. This moment, this sunset, this simple act of being together was what they had always treasured most. All the accomplishments, all the wealth they had accumulated, all the respect they commanded in the territory meant less than these quiet evenings on the porch. I am not afraid of dying, Theresa said suddenly. When my time comes, I have lived a full life. I have loved and been loved. I have children and grandchildren who will carry on, and I have had you, Owen. You have been the greatest gift of my life. Owen's throat tightened with emotion. Do not talk about dying. We have years left. Maybe, or maybe not. We are old, my love. We have been blessed with good health and long lives, but nothing lasts forever. I just want you to know that I am at peace. If I go first, I do not want you to grieve too hard or too long. I want you to remember the joy we shared. And if I go first, Owen challenged, then I will miss you every moment of every day until I see you again. But I will not fall apart. You have taught me to be strong, to keep going. I will honor your memory by living well, just as you would honor mine. They sat together as the sun touched the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of orange and pink and purple. It was a spectacular sunset, the kind that had taken their breath away for decades. The kind that reminded them why they had built their life in this place, under these vast skies. I love you, Theresa Winchester, Owen said, his voice rough with feeling. I have loved you since the day I made that poultice and sat beside your bed, willing you to live. I will love you beyond the end of my days and into whatever comes after. I love you too, Owen, more than words can express. You are my savior, my partner, my home. Everything good in my life came from the moment you chose to help me. I will be grateful for that choice until my last breath. The sun slipped below the horizon, and twilight settled over the desert. Stars began to appear, one by one, the same stars that had watched over them for their entire marriage. Owen and Theresa sat together in the gathering darkness, content in each other's presence, secure in a love that had been tested and proven time and again. They would have a few more years together, years filled with more grandchildren and great-grandchildren, more sunsets and quiet conversations, more ordinary days made extraordinary by love. When Owen finally passed peacefully in his sleep in 1929 at the age of 77, Theresa mourned him deeply, but did not break. She lived on for another 6 years, surrounded by the family they had built together, the legacy they had created. When Theresa died in 1935 at the age of 78, the family gathered to bury her beside Owen in the cemetery on the ranch they had loved. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood together, united by the example Owen and Theresa had set, the model of love and partnership they had provided. The house by the river remained in the family, passed down through the generations. And on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right and the sunset was particularly beautiful, those who sat on the porch swore they could feel a presence, a sense of peace and love that lingered in that special place. Some said it was just imagination, the power of family stories and cherished memories, but others knew better. They knew that some loves are so strong they transcend death, that some bonds are too powerful to be broken by something as simple as mortality. Owen and Theresa Winchester had found each other against all odds, had built a life of meaning and purpose, and had loved each other with a devotion that became legendary in their family and community. And it all started with an infection that spread up her arm for days, and a cowboy who made the poultice that saved her life. From that moment of crisis and healing had bloomed a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of compassion, knowledge, and two hearts that recognized each other as home. The Winchester family continued to thrive for generations, always remembering the story of Owen and Theresa, of how they met and fell in love. The story was told to children and grandchildren, great-grandchildren and beyond, a reminder that sometimes the worst moments in our lives lead to the greatest blessings, that tragedy and joy are often intertwined in ways we cannot predict or understand. The house by the river stood for over a century, eventually becoming a historic landmark, preserved as an example of late 19th century ranch architecture. But for those who knew the true story, it was more than just a building. It was a monument to love, to healing, to the way two people can save each other in all the ways that matter. And on the porch of that house, in the place where Owen and Theresa had spent so many evenings together, there was a small brass plaque placed by their descendants. It read simply, "Here sat Owen and Theresa Winchester, who found in each other everything they had been searching for and more than they had known to want. Their love began with healing and lasted a lifetime. May we all be so blessed." The desert wind continued to blow across New Mexico, carrying with it the scent of sage and creosote, the same plants that had saved Theresa's life all those years ago. The sun continued to rise and set over the land the Winchesters had loved. And somewhere in the fabric of time and memory, two souls remained forever intertwined, bound by a love that had conquered death, distance, and every obstacle that life could place in their path. It was a love story for the ages, born from poison and healing, from desperation and compassion, from a cowboy's knowledge and a woman's will to survive. It was the story of Owen and Theresa Winchester, whose legacy lived on in every descendant who inherited their strength, their resilience, and their capacity for deep and abiding love. And it all began with an infection that spread for days, and a poultice made from desert plants, and a choice to save a stranger's life that ended up saving two lives in all the ways that truly matter.